Greetings, my friends, and welcome back to Covenant of Grace TV. I'm Reverend Ron L. Spradley, Pastor Emeritus of Covenant of Grace. As you know, it's Thursday. We do our prophetic Soundbites on Thursday. We've been in a series called The Doctrine of Human Suffering. This is part 6. We've been covering the biblical reasons for human suffering. Let's get right into today's teaching. We told you that suffering is a product of the fall of man in the Garden of Eden, and it's the consequence of human sin against Yahweh. Suffering for the believer implies overcoming pain or distress, sickness, poverty, or loss. Okay? Let's recap what we've already covered. We said human suffering is to learn obedience to Yahweh's divine plan. It's to develop patience and endurance. Number 3 says to resolve the angelic conflict. Number 4, we talked about suffering for righteousness' sake. Number 5, we talked about suffering due to gluttony and diet. We shared scripture with you on each of these. And number 6 today, we're going to talk about self-induced suffering from poor decision-making and actions, refusal to conform to the will of God. We're going to come from Deuteronomy 30 and 19 as our main scripture. Here, Yahweh says, I call heaven and earth to record this day against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and cursings. Therefore, choose life that both thou and thy seed may live. So this scripture shows us the importance of decision making and actions, right? We can clearly see what's been set before us. Point number 8, the biblical truth must be the foundation of all profitable decision making. If we're going to make good decisions, all right, we have to have the scripture as a basis for those decision making. Now, this self-induced suffering, let me talk about a little bit more about suffering. There are two kinds of suffering, okay? There is suffering for discipline, all right? You're suffering because you're undisciplined, but there also is a suffering for blessings. So we need to understand the difference between the two, suffering for discipline and suffering for blessings. Therefore, we shouldn't be quick to draw judgment when somebody is dealing or suffering with an issue, because what we need to remember, Christ, who was sinless, who knew no sin, but became sin for us, that the righteousness of God, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. So we can see Christ's suffering was suffering for blessings. He suffered to put the blessing on us. So we need to understand there's a major difference between the two. Therefore, we shouldn't be quick to judge at all, because we may not understand the real reason a person may be suffering. They may be suffering for blessings. Okay? I want you to get a hold of that. Number B, all right, a recreated spirit, a renewed mind, and a positive will toward Bible doctrine is needed for godly decision making and action. So we see we're laying these things out. Ultimately, life is a summation of the decisions we've made and the actions we've taken. Okay, let's move on. If one has been deceived, okay, most people don't intentionally make bad decisions. A lot of people are under deception by the enemy. So if one has been deceived by a faulty inventory of lies in the mind, They become locked in or trapped in a cycle of dark or bad decision making and action. So deception and a buildup of a faulty inventory of ideas or lies can drive a lot of faulty decision making. That's why we should learn and develop and grow in the knowledge of Bible doctrine. Let's move on. Yahweh's perfect divine will must coexist with man's free will. So man must conform his free will by choice, voluntarily, to God's perfect divine will. We have to conform to God's way of doing things in order to make sound decisions. Okay, F, it is Yahweh's perfect will that you are filled and walk in truth. All right, but you can have a negative will toward the will of Yahweh by rejecting truth. Our key principle: ungodly decision making and actions combined with a negative will toward the doctrine of Yahweh leads to a cycle of suffering and ultimate destruction. Okay, as we close out, remember the two kinds of suffering we talked about: suffering for discipline or suffering for blessings. We want to thank you for your time this morning. May God bless you and keep you till we have another opportunity to bring you a word once again. God bless.